Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of BBCo Talks. Today we're with the wonderful Rob Trippett. Hello, Rob. How you doing?
Hi.
Thanks for
Good,
joining
good.
us.
No
So,
problems.
Rob, we always like to kick off with, the people who potentially don't know you or have not met you or not seen you and just emailed you. Would you mind just giving us a little brief overview of who you are and what you do in the business?
Yeah, I'm head of IT, being around in Barco for lots of years. This time round, about 8 or 9 years. But I was around for several years prior to that, even going back to the Loch Fyne days, as an external person rather than internal. Although I've been employed internally twice now, over sort of a 12, 15-year period. You can't get rid of me.
Like a bad smell, you keep coming back.
Thanks.
All right, well, I'm sure we'll dive into that a bit more in a minute because I don't actually know that history, so that's going to be quite interesting. So before we do, let's take it right back. This is how I love to kick these off. So I like to bring it back to that sort of time when you're in school, leaving school. What was kind of the aspirations you had at the time versus the reality of the journey you took?
Well, when I was at school, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. God knows why, and I'm pretty glad I didn't go into that field. My brother and sister had both gone to uni, so for me that was the natural path. Um, I flunked my A level. Well, I got okay A levels, but I didn't get the grades I wanted to become a lawyer. So I looked around for what I could do and ended up doing an engineering degree, or engineering and business degree in what started off as a poly. And very kindly, the government converted polytechnics into universities, so I managed to graduate with a university degree, which was not what I thought was going to happen when I first went there. And then in my first year, I got involved in a crowd of people who used to go to a nightclub once or twice a week to a student night, and I'd trot off down to the Ritzy in Leicester and have a good time down there, and loved the atmosphere, loved the whole scene, and ended up getting a bar job down there, which was my first introduction to hospitality. And yeah, you can kind of trace that bar job to where I am now, in a slightly long-winded way.
Oh, well, let's do it. Let's go then. So first off, never knew you worked in the bar, so you'll be making the coffee for me next. I'm not sure if you make many coffees in a nightclub, but
No,
no.
not even Nescafe.
So then take us through that journey. Then you mentioned obviously at the beginning you've done sort of in and out bits with the companies along the way, but what was
Yeah.
the journey from that bar job?
I worked for about a year in the nightclub, several times a week, and then realised when I flunked my first year results and had to retake the first year exams, that I probably ought to take the uni work a bit more seriously. So I gave up the bar job. Thankfully, got through to the second year, and then I'd like to say I was a studious uni student from that point onwards, but I was an okay uni student. And graduated, and looked around for some jobs. Didn't find anything to go straight into when I graduated, so I thought, well, I'll go back to the bar job that I had. And the at that time, Mecca Leisure, who ran Ritzy, oh God, that makes me sound so old. They'd closed the site and it had been reopened by a company called Luminar, whose chairman at the time, I think, was Ian Glynn, a name that you might recognise from the
Yes.
conversation with Mark Derry. Anyway, so I got a bar job there, and I wasn't doing anything else, so I worked every hour that I could just to earn some money, and ended up becoming, what did I do? First of all, I became a cellarman, which I've never told Ray, and I'm sure he's going to rib me for that. But to get some more money, I did some daytime work as a cellarman. Then I became bars manager, then worked my way up to assistant manager, then deputy manager. And this was in the company's biggest nightclub in the country at the time. It had about 35 sites or so. And because it was the biggest, despite the fact that I was only deputy manager, it's a fairly prestigious role, and very quickly within about 18 months, got myself my own general manager's job, in the illustrious town of Basingstoke, and it wasn't. It was back in the days where you could smoke inside, and it was definitely a dark, dingy, sticky carpets, smoke-filled room type of place. But I loved it. I loved the atmosphere. I loved the whole, the whole vibe that you get in a nightclub, and you had to live the whole experience. You didn't have a social life. Your social life was work, and being as people will recognise, you come into work, you do the day job, you then do the night job as well. And at the time, this was before Sunday trading was allowed in nightclubs, and I looked at the future, and I thought, wow, there's 35 other general managers out there wanting to take the next step. The next step is an area manager job, or an ops manager job, and I thought, well, there's 34 of them ahead of me, so. I looked around for something else to do that meant when Sunday trading laws came in, which were just around the corner, I didn't have to work 7 days a week and 7 nights a week. So left the nightclub game, went to work for a sports car and race car company, and spent a year, moved back to Sheffield, which was my hometown, and spent a year playing with sports cars and race cars and going rattling around racetracks every other weekend, and doing every schoolboy's dream job, really. It really was. It was great fun, but there was absolutely no money in it. And there were times when you knew you couldn't put the paycheck, and this was back in the days when you got a check. You knew you couldn't put the paycheck in the bank the day you got it because you knew that it was going to bounce, so you had to leave it a week or two before you. And it was kind of that sort of business, which wasn't the most stable thing in the world. I had a baby on the way, and I thought, I need to go back to something more stable. And bizarrely, the stable thing was nightclubs. And you wouldn't think that nightclub industry is more stable than a lot. Well, it's not anymore, thanks to COVID. But at the time, Luminar had grown from, when I left them, 35 odd sites to about 50 sites. And I went back, having been, it's the age-old poacher turned gamekeeper scenario. Having been an operator, I went back to head office as an auditor, which definitely not the most exciting job in the world, but a load of variety, and you're in an
still with the same
industry.
company.
Still with the same company, Luminar. So back to where I had been a year or two earlier. And from there, I got a reputation, and don't tell Chris this, but I got a reputation for knowing my way around a spreadsheet. And I ended up writing a load of spreadsheet-based stock taking and auditing systems. And from there, I kind of fell into a role where I was seconded into the IT department to help them write some proper systems. So we at the time, Luminar, as I say, had grown to about 50 sites. As with any growing business, the systems were starting to creak because they were based. Christ, when I first started as general manager, you used to phone the figures through at the end of the night onto an answer machine, and then we progressed into faxing the figures through because faxes were all the rage, and then it progressed into emailing the figures through. And so I joined when they were at the stage where they're still having nightly sales figures emailed in. It's like, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And I got involved in a project where we were looking at how we could make a better, more grown-up system to allow the company to continue to grow. And we did that, and around that sort of time, they got rid of their IT manager, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and got the job.
So that's the first sort of transition into officially
into IT. Yeah, okay. Yeah. From just being a uni graduate who likes to work in bars. So that was my first. I mean, I'd always messed about with computers, even when I was at uni. My first computer had a 20 meg hard drive, and
20 meg. Oh my god.
It was back in the days well before Windows 95 came along. And then when I got into IT proper is around when Windows 95 was around, which was a horrible time to be in IT. I'd always liked tinkering with computers, and it was just right place, right time, or wrong place, right time, depending on which way you look at it. That got me
And
into
where
IT.
did that link come in then? So now we kind of see you in this IT role. This is the Mr. Trippett that we kind of know today,
Started
where
to
he
know,
began.
yeah.
So where did you go from there to sort of linking to the brasserie, or what was the brasserie at that time?
So the finance director at the time was a guy called Norman Hall, who a few years later became the FD of Brasserie Blanc, or Blanc Brasseries. So when Mark sold Loch Fyne restaurants to Greene King, they spun out Brasserie Blanc into its own independent company. But prior to that, I'd spun out part of the IT departments in Luminar into a self-contained business that looked at developing the systems we'd written for Luminar for other businesses. So we'd written all these things for Luminar that were bespoke to them for sales reporting, bankings, stock taking, payroll and rotas, and there were a good bunch of systems that were big and robust. And by that time, the company had grown from 50 sites to 300 sites. Oh, wow. We had 10,000 employees. We'd written this rota system that was originally designed for about 2,000 employees, and it ended up paying 10,000 employees every week. And it was a weekly payroll, so it was a real pressure job. And we spun this company out to try and make some money by selling that software we developed onto other companies. One of those other companies happened to be Loch Fyne. And so I became we still had a shareholding by Luminar, but we became this independent company where Loch Fyne was one of our customers. And then when Loch Fyne was bought by Greene King and they spun Brasserie Blanc out into its own independent company, I helped set up the head office systems, bought the first server, set up the email, and did bits and pieces like that for the FD at the time, which was Norman Hall, who I'd known from the Luminar days. So that's kind of where the connection came from. So he was finance director at Luminar. After he'd left and I'd spun out the IT company from Luminar, he then got involved in Loch Fyne and then brought me back in to help set up.
So this is obviously the beginning where you said you had that sort of external influence.
Yeah.
That's the Luminar influence there, is it?
Yeah.
And at what point did you officially come on the payroll with?
God, I can't remember what year it was, but it was when Milton Keynes first opened. So that was site number 7. I think there might have been 1 or 2 that closed, but so there might have only been 5, 6, or 7 trading sites at that time. But they put the office, what is currently a storeroom up above near the manager's office up in Milton Keynes. They put the head office up in there, and I helped set up.
I remember that. I remember seeing you in there with the IT room.
Yeah. Well, it eventually became an IT room after a few years, but it was head office. But it was only big enough for 3 people. It was a tiny little thing. So that was my first experience of working directly for Blanc myself, and I was asked to. We weren't big enough to have a full-time IT person, so I was asked to come on the books as a part-timer. So I did 2 days a week for Brasserie Blanc, and I did 2 days a week for another IT consultancy that I was working for at the time. But the reality is, I probably did 3 days a week for each, because as Nicky and anyone else who's done that sort of job will testify. When you're part-time, you do more than the part-time hours.
You never leave it at the door, do you?
Yeah, absolutely. So after a year or 2 of doing that, I was asked by the other company I was doing the work for, the IT consultancy, to set up an IT support company. So went off and did that and took along Brasserie Blanc. I think they'd just become Brasserie Barco at that point, or around the time where they were morphing from Blanc to Barco. I took them along as a customer. So I went from being a part-time internal IT person for Brasserie Blanc to being an external IT provider again, for the second time. And did that for a couple of years. And then Barco was starting to get bigger and bigger. We'd opened the King's and the Queen's Head, or they had opened the King's and the Queen's Head at the time. And Helen and Mark had aspirations to really grow the business much, much faster. So poached me back from the IT support company that I'd set up and brought me back full time, which was 2012, I think, which is where my current tenure started.
Okay, wow. So you really have been in and out over the way, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting when I speak to a few people that they have similar sort of journeys where they, classic hospitality, they know someone who knew someone who worked for us and they brought him along or whatever. So, all right. And then, so sort of full-time for the best part of around 10 years and then part-time and way beyond that. So
Yeah.
If I was to hit you with the big question then, what do you love most about your job?
The people and the variety. I've worked for companies where the people are a bit dour and negative and not full of life, and some of the IT world's a bit like that, and it drags you down. Whereas BBCo, you always get a vibe. There's always something going on. So I that was one of the attractions for coming back to BBCo when I came back 9-10 years ago. I love that things are ever changing. There's people out there that hate change and or are cautious about change. I love it. Bring it on. It's possibly my downfall slightly occasionally because I will try and tackle as much as we can if I think it's something that's going to be beneficial. And even if it's new and exciting, I want to have a look at it and I want to have a play with it. And that's kind of one of the reasons I got into IT was that things are ever changing, things are always evolving, and I just love that whole.
Well, there's no industry that evolves quicker than IT, is there? Really, I mean, it's incredible that you just having to keep up with it all more than anything else.
Well, sometimes a challenge, but it's you either like it or you don't, and I like it.
I'm with you on the change. I love change. I think change is one of those things. If it's not done right and people aren't brought along that journey, then it can be quite daunting. But if you bring people with you and help them understand why, game on. And in your tenure, Rob, is there a standout moment for you or moments?
Difficult one. There's so many. There's been, from an IT perspective, moving not long after I arrived, moving to a different ecosystem was a slightly hellish journey, but really satisfying that we eventually got there. And we had 20 odd sites at the time, and changing to Zonal was a big step. But it was a hard step, and it was one that Zonal didn't get particularly right in the early days. Thankfully, they got better. Standout moments. I mean, I could mention conferences, but probably maybe ought not to.
Let's keep it PG. Let's move on from that very quickly.
But I don't know. There's so many. It's been a long and enjoyable journey that I couldn't pick one.
No, that's fine. That's fair enough. You've been here many a years, so it's hard to narrow it down. Right, I'm going to finish this with some quick fire questions. I say this every time, but I don't know why this is question number one, but it is Marmite. Do you love it or do you hate it?
Love it.
Oh, Rob, we were doing so well.
I won't give you Kaz's response about how much you should or shouldn't put on there. That's more of a techie answer than marketeer. Marketeers should just say, bring it on. So I say, bring it on. Right,
okay. Oh, gutted. Anyway, I've done a would you rather based on IT, obviously, because it gave me a unique opportunity. So, I'm not sure this sentence works well, but I'll say it anyway. Would you rather never use your laptop again or never use your phone again?
Never use my laptop.
Okay. Fair enough. Quick on that. I'm putting you on the spot here because I haven't prepped you on this, but is there a best place you've ever visited? Somewhere that's really caught you off guard and you thought, wow.
There's a lovely place near Courchevel that springs to mind. I love skiing, so it's got to be Le Prat in the Alps.
Okay.
It's a beautiful place to be.
Amazing. And last one for me, and I like to ask everyone this, and again, I've not prepped you in this, but what's your happy place? When you're in those times of struggle or when you're trying to think to that positive mind, what is your happy place that you go to?
mentally drifting off, and just switching off. And you have to do it. Yeah, you really have to do it every so often. I learned in the early days that you can't do 24/7. You've got to be able to switch your mind off. And give me a big open field or a beach and a great view, and holidays, it does take me a little bit of time to wind down, but getting to the point where you can switch your mind off and just drift into nothingness is my happy
Do you
place.
find with your holidays that you tend to, and I'm making an assumption here, go the opposite and try and remove technology a lot and just embrace nature and the views?
It's so hard to, I mean, 10, 15 years ago, it was relatively easy, because if you didn't take your laptop with you, and your phone was just a phone, you could switch it off. Nowadays, it's much harder, because if you've got your phone in your hand, you've inevitably got your email with you, and so I flick between trying to switch off completely and almost always failing to, and thinking, well, if I just delete a few random emails that I'm not interested in, I'll have less to come back to when I come back. And I genuinely try not to get involved.
I know you don't always get it right, because I've had a few conference calls with you in your camper van during lockdown. Rob, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Really great to sort of understand your history.
Didn't even mention the 5 kids.
I thought that was pretty good of me. If you want to bring that up, I mean, I have been prepped by HR not to mention it. But
okay, right. Let's move on.
So we'll add that in there, Rob. How many kids have you got?
I've got 5.
Okay. Not saying anything.
I
was very tempted when you said, and I had my first kid on the way. I thought, don't say it.
Well, if the time is right, then never say never.
That's it, absolutely. And there was 5 perfect times. So
absolutely.
Rob, thanks so much. That was awesome.
All right, no worries. Take care.